Well, welcome everybody to Empathy for Educators. Um, we'll each introduce ourselves. We are all here, professors here at Bowling Green. My name's Alicia Mrachko, and I am an associate professor in our School of Inclusive Teacher Education, and my specialty is special education and young children.
I'll go next. Hi, folks. My name is Lisa Handyside, and I am also an associate professor in our School of Inclusive Teacher Education. And I teach in the special education program and also the inclusive PK5 program.
I'll go next. I'm Mariana Mereoiu, and I am also an associate professor in our School of Inclusive Teaching, Teacher Education, and I typically teach courses in our inclusive early childhood program, mainly focused on working with families or cultural linguistic diversity, and I sometimes teach classes in our graduate special ed programs.
Hello, and I'm Sherri. I'm a professor in the School of Counseling, Higher Ed, and Educational Foundations, and I teach educational psychology, and I teach the whole gambit. So pre-service teachers that are going in any level of schooling.
Before we get going, one little note, we would love for you to change your rename yourself on your screen. You can do that by clicking up on your name or in the little three dots on your screen, the little screen of you, so that you can tell us where you're from and what you teach. I know Catherine Sadowski's already done that, which was great. And so that's a great example if you want to look at hers. Because that just helps us know who's here. And we want to make sure we're meeting the needs of the folks that are here on the call, the Zoom with us. So our presentation today was funded by a grant that we have here at Bowling Green called C2S2, which stands for Communication and Connection for Safe Schools. And it's about mental health and well-being in our schools here in Northwest Ohio specifically. So we're trying to prevent school violence. And this type of training is one way we are hoping to do that. And these are our X and Instagram. You can follow us on both those social media because we do offer lots of different trainings, and we also have online modules and things that you can access that could be very helpful. So today we are going to start by defining what empathy is and give a rationale for why this is important. Then we'll talk about how you can reflect yourself and strategies you can use in your classroom and with your families to help you become a more empathetic instructor. And of course, take questions.
Okay. I'll go ahead and get us started. And so we'll start with a very brief introduction of the theoretical framework for empathy and a definition for this concept. However, we will not spend a lot of time on this theoretical part because we want to spend time, the bulk of our session on strategies to practice empathy and on discussions of your experiences. Still, just a few words to define empathy. We all have some intuitive understanding of what empathy is, though if you are here, you might have already spent some time thinking about it or studying this concept. And so because this is a skill that we use often in our interactions and in our personal lives, In our professions across many fields of practice, there is a significant amount of literature actually published that offers a variety of definitions for empathy. And there are some slight variations depending on the background of the scholars interested in studying empathy. But for the purpose of our discussion here, we define empathy as the ability to first understand what others are experiencing from their perspectives and then communicate that understanding appropriately, which means that, as we will see a bit later in this session, it means that the receiver of the empathetic effort validates it as such. An important aspect to keep in mind is that this understanding is in reaction to the perspective of others. So it's their perceptions, their emotions, their interpretation of events. And so although empathy feels intuitive, and oftentimes is experienced rather as an emotional reaction, it actually has two domains or components recognized by most authors in the field. And those are an emotional domain, or empathetic concern, or sympathy. It's really feeling with the other or for the other, and an intellectual domain known as perspective taking. And it's actually the perspective taking that happens first and that serves as an anchor for the process. And it's when we spontaneously or intentionally adopt the point of view of others or imagine what they're thinking or feeling that triggers an emotional response or empathetic concern for what they might be experiencing. I think we can move on to the next slide. Which this is the most important aspect to understand and remember empathetic interactions. It's the perspective taking component or the anchor or of the process that leads to empathy-based interactions. However, to do so, we need to make sure that we engage in what is called imagine other, or imagining what others might be thinking or feeling, and not imagining self. And it's a common misconception of what empathy is, right? Imagining how we would feel or how we would think in a specific situation. And it's understandable that this happens because many of us grew up being told that we should put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And we learned, from others, or we're encouraged by parents or educators to think how we would feel if we were treated in a certain way. And it's also natural for this to happen because we interpret the world with the devices that we have. So we need to use our prior knowledge to make sense of new information. So we need to have some sort of basic understanding of an event to be able to begin thinking about it from different perspectives. And it's even trickier for educators and other practitioners serving children and families because they are passionate about helping children and families, and their professions are guided by a set of values and practices that give a clear direction, right, about what is considered the best course of action to give help. However, when we engage in imagine self, we make reference to our own cultural lenses, our racial or ethnic or gender identity, our lived experiences. And so we use our own lenses. It's really all about us, and it has nothing to do with the person who is supposed to be the receiver of our empathy. And so engaging in imagining self leads to false empathy most of the time because when we're imagining ourselves in these situations, we might experience a set of emotions such as personal distress, which we then mistake for empathetic concern. And so that is why maybe sometimes we are surprised when we receive feedback from maybe in our personal lives or from our students or families we serve, indicating that um, despite our efforts, they feel misunderstood, they feel unheard. And so, to create the prospects of genuine empathy, we need to engage in imagine others. So that means, right, we're adopting the point of view of others with their thinking and their identities and histories and personal context. So when we do so, we use the lenses of the individual who is the intended receiver of our empathetic efforts. So then we're more likely to truly begin to understand what they're experiencing. And it can be a difficult start, especially if we feel we don't have sufficient knowledge of the student or the parent that we're trying to support. And perhaps they're from a cultural background different from your own, or maybe you don't have a child with a disability, and though you have the professional knowledge and extensive experience working with students with disabilities, um, being the parent of a child with a disability is just not part of your identity, and so you don't have experience with that role. And so throughout this presentation, we will share some strategies to help you start this process and help you in taking perspective by imagining other and not self, and really engaging in genuine empathy, such as starting really with recognizing this lack of context, right? And looking for or seeking information to help you understand from the only sources that can provide it, which are the students and families. I think we can move on to the next slide. And so knowing that this is a fairly complex process and that it might take time and really involved individual efforts, you might be wondering, why would you even want to invest in empathetic interactions? Your entire day is very carefully probably planned, and you have to divide your time across so many tasks you have, right? You have to plan and you have to prepare, you have to instruct, you have to collaborate. You're part of many teams in your practice. So why would you want to make this effort? And the reason for that is that it helps to improve practice. And so the literature on the subject indicates that there are a number of benefits for students, for families, for practitioners that are well worthwhile. And so the first one is that engaging in genuine empathy allows us to truly get to know and understand students and families in an authentic way, because in order to imagine other, right, we have to know the other. And to do so, we need to be intentional in the effort we make to get to know them. And that on its own brings significant benefits, because, right, the better we know our students and families, the more likely we are that we design experiences that are actually aligned with their needs. And so being intentional about discriminating between imagine other and imagine self allows us to also identify our own patterns of attitudes and beliefs, and to be alert at how they might influence our practice, and be intentional also on examining and improving our practice. So we promised that we would keep this theoretical part short, and so the last thing that I wanted to share with you is that another reason for engaging in empathetic research, empathetic practice, is that research findings indicate that when we engage in empathy-based interactions, our practice improves specifically in how we communicate and how we respond to students and families, and particularly students and families from diverse cultural linguistic backgrounds. So students and families who might bring in experiences that are different from those from majority groups. And these findings oftentimes are validated by those who benefit from practitioner empathy. So when students and families perceive teachers, for example, as empathetic, they report that communication is more effective and that they work better together. And with this improved communication and um, uh, practice and collaboration, then right, we get to know and understand student needs better, and most importantly, there is an increased likelihood that they would experience improved academic and learning outcomes. I think we can move on to the next one. So now that we briefly reviewed the core components of empathy and its benefits, we wanted to take a little bit of time and hear from you how you use empathy in your practice. So maybe, we have some starting questions here, but and we hope they capture, things that you would like to share, but feel free to maybe think of other issues as well. We thought maybe we want to start with maybe thinking what place does empathy hold in your practice, and how important it is for the goals that you have in your position. Maybe you want to share what are some challenges that you might have experienced when you try to use empathy, maybe at an individual level or a systemic level, or what are some critical needs you see in this area. And so we would love to hear from you, and we're hoping that you will unmute yourself and engage in a discussion with us. But if you would prefer to put some of your thoughts in the chat, then that's okay as well. And we will monitor the chat, and we'll bring your comments to discussion. I wonder if it might be help. Oh, there we go. We have a yes. So Catherine is sharing that there just isn't enough time in a day to be able to engage in empathetic interactions with some of the students. That is absolutely a challenge that is actually well documented. When you have so many things to do, it's really hard to create the space and the time to um, to engage in empathetic interactions. Yes, Heather is saying the same thing. The struggle is time. Empathy takes time to listen, and when we feel rushed with responsibilities, we have to remind ourselves how important it is to stop and listen.
Heather, I appreciate that last statement. I remind
Yes,
myself that I don't work in the emergency room.
absolutely. Although it does feel sometimes like
feels
we're
that
putting
way.
out fires. Yes, it is. I think the nature of the profession is just there are more, there is an increasing number of things that practitioners have to do, and so there are things that we have to check off the list, but the quality of the relationships that we're trying to create with students and families then is kind of really hard to include. Yes, very good point. Tiffany is saying we have staff who struggle with empathy when they're responding emotionally and don't have the time to regulate themselves in the moment. So, Tiffany, I think that is such an important part of the process. And for the remainder of the session, we're going to talk about empathy as a process that I think at the beginning is very intentional, but it takes a lot of time, I think, for us to kind of get right into it and do it automatically and kind of learn how to regulate our own emotions. Thank you for pointing that out. Jody's saying when students misbehave, being empathetic towards them can help our decisions about discipline. Absolutely, because all behaviors are an indicator of a student need, and in order to understand it, we have to really have to take the student perspective and try to kind of understand how they are thinking and feeling and how those things led to the actions that they are taking. And Kylie is saying, I think my biggest struggle is feeling empathy for students when they're trying the interventions or things suggested. Someone once told me that as a school counselor, we shouldn't be working harder than them. It's so true, but difficult because I want to be there for them. Yes, absolutely. Um, another area that we will address in the training is this fine balance between helping students or families and providing with the tools to be successful in situations and be empathetic to their needs and where and enabling, right, and maybe taking away opportunities to practice this skill. So I think you're right, Kylie. It's important to kind of make the difference there. Yes, Catherine is so it's the nature of our profession. We are, educators, school counselors, social workers. We are in the help giving set of professions. And so it's so deeply rooted in our training, in a set of skills that we develop that we want to help. Thank you. Okay. I'm not sure how we are doing with time, if we want to spend a little bit more time or we can move on.
It's up to you. Do you want me to start the reflection process or do we want to take more comments?
I wonder if we want to go ahead and start because there are other things that we want to
Sure.
apply.
All right, so we created this organizer to help ourselves with really kind of understanding the process of reflection when we're employing the practice of empathy. And we're going to go through each of these ideas in our reflection process and each of the questions that we'll go through, and to remember that it is really a process that really takes time to complete as well. So the first step in our reflection strategy process is really just ask ourselves some questions, right? What are my initial thoughts about the interaction? What is my perspective on the issue? Why do I think this way? And another set of questions that we can ask ourselves is, how does this make me feel? And why am I feeling this way? And then one strategy to help with this is really self-reflection. Self-reflection helps us to become aware of our own lenses and what influences our own lenses, and to be alert of those personal lenses when we are interpreting our students and our families, their actions and their decisions, and really their overall engagement. And one strategy, the strategy that was used was really being intentional in our observations and really to try and think about and avoid kind of falling back into our own experiences and our own knowledge, which brings us back to, imagining ourselves. And that can really kind of help us to create a space to use when we are really imagining others and imagining the other person and that the student and the family and their own experiences and the knowledge that our students and our families possess as well. And so when we're reflecting, We reflect on our contributions as an educator or a counselor, and the situations that we're addressing, whether they're intentional or whether they're unintentional, which is often based on our own lenses, our racial identity, our gender. All of those things really influence kind of what and how we see things. Does anyone have any examples that they want to uh, suggest here in our first self-reflection? I'll give you a minute to think. If not, we can move on. Move on. Our next set of questions that we can ask ourselves is, how might those involved in the situation feel? What might they be thinking? And this is where we want to make sure that we become aware of the differences between our own and others' perspectives to really attempt to move from imagining ourselves to imagining others. And a strategy to help us with that would be active listening, something that I know that we've all heard of, but let's talk about it just a little bit. So the rationale for active listening is really to help us to improve or to remediate our communication, and to avoid or clarify any misunderstandings that may be kind of happening between us and our students or us and our families as well. And it's also so important for us to remember to imagine the other person rather than ourselves. And so this strategy is to really listen with the purpose for really of understanding the other person and their feelings and their experiences and what they're going through. So we want to make sure that we avoid things like reacting and correcting. And then periodically ask the parent, ask students about their input. On things like what's happening in our classroom, but also what's happening at the school level too, because that can affect as well interactions. So what we're going to do now is share a short video with you from Inside Out, and then we'll think about. Oop, wait, let me get you to the right. There.
My rocket! Wait, Granny and I were still using that rocket. It still has some song power left. Who's your friend who likes to play? No, no, you can't take my rocket to the top.
TV.
Oh. Riley can't be done with me.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. We can fix this. We just need to get back to headquarters. Which way to the train station?
I had a whole trip planned for us.
Hey, who's ticklish, huh? Here comes the tickle monster. Hey, Bing Bong, look at this. Oh, here's a fun game. You point to the train station and we all go there. Won't that be fun? Come on, let's go to the train station.
I'm sorry they took your rocket. They took something that you loved. It's gone forever.
Sadness. Don't make him feel worse.
Sorry.
It's all I had left of Riley.
I bet you and Riley had great adventures.
Oh, they were wonderful. Once we flew back in time, we had breakfast twice that day.
Yes.
Sounds amazing. I bet Riley liked it.
Oh, she did.
Yeah. Sad.
Okay.
I'm okay now. Come on, the train station is this way.
Did you do that?
I don't know. He was sad, so I listened to what.
Hey, there's the train.
This is a cool scene.
All right. So I thought that was a really great clip. thinking about joy and sadness and how they interacted with Bing Bong. So we have a few things to reflect about and to think about and to chat about. So why isn't joy's behavior helpful to Bing Bong? Why is sadness's behavior helpful? What type of strategy does sadness use? And what type of strategies does joy use? Which one do you think works best or better? So thoughts, you can feel free to put them in the chat and we'll um, talk about them. Or if you want to turn your mic on and chat out loud. Thanks, Heather. Joy has an agenda, was even manipulative, trying to distract Bing Bong from his sadness. Yeah. She kind of did have a little agenda, didn't she? She was like, intent on getting where they needed to be. Thank you, Heather. Jody, Bing Bong's sadness had to be acknowledged. Yeah, after he cried a bit, he was ready to move on. Yeah, I think that's something that we definitely need to be cognizant of is really acknowledging other folks and their feelings as well. Catherine, everyone needs a good cry. That's so true. Absolutely, right? Sadness is helpful because she acknowledged his feelings. Absolutely. Very good. Thanks, Caitlin.
And she listened to him
She
too,
did.
you
Yeah.
know, when she didn't try to, like Joy, distract him away from what he was feeling.
Yeah.
And just to add on, so which one do you think was using the imagined self and which one was using imagined other?
Oh, Heather, that's good. The Guest House, poem by Rumi. We have to invite all feelings in and hear what they have to say. Our own too, right? Do we remember what strategy? I will have to look it up. Oh, the Guest House. Oh, Alicia, you're muted.
I was just reading the chat. Tiffany said Joy was imagining self while sadness was imagining other.
Yeah,
I
good.
think that's
Yeah, and I also think that they're really using active listening for sure. And what's our other one? Active listening and self-reflection. Well, I would say like at the end of the clip, Joy was actually not really self-reflecting, but maybe sadness was a little bit more than Joy was. So nice.
Yeah.
All right.
I think also sadness decides to sit with him. And sometimes sitting with somebody and allowing them to feel their feelings and mirroring them it creates a space to process them, which then later on you're right, you're able to move on. But sitting with somebody and sitting with those emotions, it's so important.
okay. Unmute myself. So if we continue to go through that reflective questions, thinking, the next two are what other perspectives can be considered and what are they? What are those perspectives? And then what are my feelings when I'm considering how those involved might think and feel? So when I'm thinking, trying to do imagine other, how am I feeling about that as I'm doing it? So one of the strategies that can help with answering those questions is simply to being accepting of the student and family interpretation of their experience. And we do this because it promotes trust. They trust us, and then we begin to trust them as well. It's a two-way street. But the idea that what they're telling us they're experiencing is valid, that we're not going to invalidate it by saying, well, no, that's not really how it worked, or that's not really how it happened. We want to invite their perspective, and recognize that it's valuable because that is their experience, their lived experience, even if we don't necessarily, we didn't see it the same way if we were there even. And something that they may say may not be what we typically hear or typically experience ourselves in our own time. Can you think of a time when a family was telling you something, or a parent or a child, a student, and you're thinking, no, no, that's not really how it is. You may not have said that out loud, but you may be thinking it. Um, can anybody think of a situation like that? I know I was thinking about an IEP meeting that I was in years ago now, as the special educator and behavior analyst. And the parent was telling us he's not like this at all at home. He never does this at home. And thinking, well, in my little judgmental moment there, thinking, well, that's because you don't ever ask him to do anything. And then, looking back later, I thought, wow, that was so inappropriate. How I didn't say that out loud, but I was thinking it, and that affected how I interacted with them the rest of the meeting. And so that was just something an experience for me personally that I have thought about over and over again. I apologize to that family in my head. Um, but
Your example, Alicia, reminds me of um, situations where I think, um, educators create really great opportunities for families to participate. And so they're genuinely trying to help. So I'm thinking, for example, programs that help families to um, um, think about or find effective ways to help kids with homework at home, or reading programs. And sometimes they're offered at times when we think that families are off work, and so we're offering them in the evening, and we provide transportation and all these great things. And sometimes families choose not to participate. And it I think one way maybe that we're tempted to think is that, well, they're not interested to participate and develop those skills. But for some families, that evening time is so important. And so they take that time of the day to reconnect, maybe to spend precious time together. And it's not that they don't find these opportunities valuable. It's just that what happens at home takes priority. And so that's kind of like for me, your example reminded me of times when we interpret the same situations, differently.
Yeah.
And to piggyback on that, that reminds me of one of my students who was a teacher several years ago, and he taught junior high, and a student was struggling, and he sent notes home, no responses from the parent or from the parents, and parent teacher night didn't show up, and he was just like, okay, this family doesn't care about it. Well, then, a little while later, he found out that the father was deceased. The mother had some major mental health issues and was in a facility, and his 21-year-old sister was trying to raise this boy. So once he found that out, it's like, oh, that totally shifted how he thought about this whole family situation, that this 21-year-old, had potential reasons for not being able to respond to what was going on. So again, not necessarily interpretation, but knowing more about what's happening really changed how my student interacted with his student and his student's sister.
Mhm. Yeah. That's a great, those are both great examples of how we need to recognize that their experience, their interpretation of the situation is their valid experience and their valid interpretation. And we don't want to discount that and so working to think through that lens is helpful. So then the next piece of that is for us to be able to be thinking about our own feelings and how we're reacting and like I did, is to commit ourselves to ongoing process of learning, which you're all doing by being here, and we're also doing by being here, because even though we've done research on this, we still don't consider ourselves experts. We are still learning more all the time. And the strategy is simply seeking out more learning and utilizing your community and your families to learn. And not just formal opportunities like we have here today, but more informal opportunities when they present themselves, or seeking that out. Opportunities if there's a community event going on and you don't live in that community, going to the event to see more about how this community functions and how your students are interacting when they're outside of your room. Can be, I know we also have our own families and our own evening family time and our own community events. So sometimes that's hard. But even hearing about it from a student, hey, I heard there was this. Tell me about it. I want to hear more about it. Is a way to be learning more about the community and the culture in the area with the students that you're working with. And then seeking feedback from the families on how well you're doing with that empathetic. Obviously, we don't have to use those exact words. There can be like anonymous surveys that you can send them. And there could even be, you're in a parent conference that you actually have the moment to talk to them, say, do you feel like I'm hearing what you're saying? Have I made enough effort to listen to you or to reach out to you? What could I do better? Those are always hard things to sometimes ask, because we want to know the answers. Sometimes we don't want to know the answers. So that's just another piece. And my guess would be that you all work very hard to communicate with your families to whatever extent you're able. And certainly now we have apps that make that much easier than it used to be in the past. And so that's another way to solicit feedback. So then we go on to ask a couple more questions. So what is my role? How am I responsible for how I'm interpreting this situation? And how am I responsible for how they're interpreting the situation? Am I contributing to a misinterpretation, or am I not but a different interpretation than I think is helpful? What am I doing to contribute to that? Or what am I doing to contribute that is really helping this and making this situation aligned? We're working together. And what am I planning to do moving forward? So certainly we are going to advocate for students and families, and we can be more active in that. That trust, that again, building that trust. So that first bullet point, learning about the experiences and the expectations that the students and the families bring to the school, and how that aligns with the assumptions within the school culture and the administration and the teacher body in the school. Because sometimes the expectations of the school are not the expectations of the family. So learning, are they the same? Are they different? How are they the same and different? And then talking with being willing to talk to your school personnel, not being feeling like I can go in and speak with the administrators about the impact on the families from whatever aspect it is. And then helping students and families understand their rights. I've been giving my students some websites to go to learn about parent rights, and also even our national NEA has a whole web page in their whole website. They have a large section on what our rights as educators are when we advocate for families. And that what is really helpful. I didn't even know it existed till last spring, and it's very, very helpful. And so, and teaching the families to self-advocate. A lot of our families don't know how to do that. They don't know how to be productive as they do that. So going that next step after that empathy, saying, okay, what's the action we can take now to help to make this a better situation?
Sorry, had a hard time getting my audio on. Okay, so the next part, where that was all the different questions and things that you can think about of trying to be more empathetic and how to do that. And then these are the next couple slides that I'm going to talk about are other things that you can think about. So Catherine had mentioned we shouldn't be working harder than our students, and that brings up this concept of hard caring versus enabling. So hard caring, as you can see on the slide, is a form of caring characterized by both the supportive instrumental relationships, which could be the empathy part, showing caring, etc. But then you also maintain your high expectations. For those of you who are teachers, that would be academic in nature, perhaps. As a counselor, you would have, keep high expectations for their behaviors, etc. as well. So and then you have to look at, are you enabling them, or this, again, this concept of keeping those high expectations. So some strategies you can do, is there any way that you can have flexibility with your expectations and what you expect from them, but also maintain strategy. So or the standards. So if you don't maintain the standards, then you're enabling them, and they might not be doing as best as they could because you're quote unquote allowing them to get away with something. So for instance, Catherine had mentioned not trying interventions or things suggested. If you allow them to continue that, are you enabling them? At some point, do you just set your standards and say, no, I've already helped you with this. Now you have to actually, what can you do? How can I help you do it, rather than suggesting more things? And then again, being conscious about whether your flexibility is harmful or helpful. Example I have of this, I just had a conversation with one of my colleagues about flexible time to turn in assignments and things like that. He works with graduate students, so they're highly appreciative of having that flexibility. And I teach sophomores in college, and they like some flexibility, but they really want me to they will tell me literally, I want you to set a deadline, because if I don't have the deadline, I'm just going to procrastinate, and I have way too much things due. final exam week, I don't want to have to do this as well. So having some flexibility, some deadline, and again, this is just an example, but deadlines, but then allow for some flexibility as needed. And then another thing, the final one is be explicit in why you're maintaining your standards. And that can still show empathy. I'm listening to you. I'm hearing you. However, this is the third time you haven't turned in the assignment. You postponed the due date. You have to get it done. And if you don't get it done by this third due date, you're going to get a 0 on the assignment. And so you're still maintaining, again, you're still expecting them to do something, but also being explicit in how you're doing that. So can anybody think of ways that you can show this hard caring beyond the examples I'd given? You can put it in the chat, or you can, again, say it out loud. Or ways that you find yourself enabling
I don't know if I would say this is necessarily enabling, as sometimes you have to lower your expectations. And I'm saying this in regards to, say, like homework. I have primary students and I do give homework because I think they should have the responsibility of being able to take something home and be expected to bring it back to school. But let's be honest, if parents are not asking their 6-year-old or their 7-year-old what's in their book bag, where's your homework? I have to say, like, some of these students are not, they're just not going to remember. They go home and sometimes they get picked up by one family member, but they go to another family member's house and the book bag gets left in the car and all these different things. So, I do give the homework, and I would say a fair amount do take it home, do return it. But a lot of students come back with their folder looking exactly the way it went home with all the same papers, all the same handouts. So I don't really feel like I enable them, but there are times I think when you do have to lower those expectations because they're not capable of doing something completely on their own.
Right. I would agree. Right. And again, I think that's a good example of being that self-reflective and saying, are my expectations too high? And then lowering them because your expectations are too high for that particular situation. But if your expectations are high enough and they're still not, and then that's when it's becoming enabling. I don't know if that makes any
Interesting.
sense, but
Yeah. To me, this is a perfect example of really being empathetic of a student's life situation. So I would not think it's a matter of lowering expectations. It's just I think of it recognizing that their life is in such a way that is very hard to maybe, we want to rethink, right? What this expectation. So like are they really necessary in this situation? So I actually love this example. Thank you, Jody.
Yes, and I don't give grades for homework either because of that reason. And I don't know, some kids get the homework done, but I don't know who's doing the homework all the time.
right. And Catherine mentions in the
Yeah.
chat, what is the purpose of the homework? So, it might not be lowering the expectations depending on what the purpose is.
And
I do know that some educators though feel sometimes that you lower the expectations because maybe you're not holding certain students to a certain standard, let's say.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true. And I, but you know, most of us come from a special education background, those of us who are presenting, and Catherine made a really good point here, being able to realize when something is hard or just not meeting them at their level. So, you know, when you're looking at a child who's not doing something, are they not doing it because they're 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 not able to do it yet? You know, we need to be providing more supports there, academically, or are they just struggling with a family situation where they don't have the support at home to, you know, the parent or the caregiver to say, hey, let's get everything out as of your backpack and go through it and see, you know, what we need to do. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think that third bullet there, be explicit in why you're maintaining your standards. I also think that could go apply for be explicit in why you are changing your standards. So it might not be completely lowering your expectations, but it's changing the standards to meet the situation in an empathetic way, for multiple different ways. But again, like being able to, even for yourself, saying, why am I doing this? Or being able to tell your colleagues, this is why I'm doing this, or telling the kids or the parents, this is why I'm doing it. So it doesn't just seem like it's just to one student or, you know, randomness.
This conversation reminds me of the concept of equity,
Right.
right? Because not everybody has the same start in the same context, so we kind of have to be sensitive to that.
I like what Heather says, that discerning what the really important thing is, right? The target, and can help you separate things about letting things slide or enabling, right? And if you think about the word enabling, it kind of implies that, as somebody put above, I think with Joy, that she's trying to be manipulative. So if you're enabling, it's more of, well, you're letting them slide, you're letting them get away with something. But if they're not getting away with it because they can't do it, that's not really enabling. But all right, so we have the other, this next slide up, so we'll move on to this next one. So avoid empathy fatigue. This is something that just really you need to think about for yourself as teachers. You know, you have a lot of students you're dealing with. You can, and each of them you're trying to show empathy with, and then the parents, that you can have empathy fatigue, or empathy burnout, and it's just something to be aware of for yourself. Both for self-care, and also if you're fatigued with it, then you're less effective for your students and their families. So just being consciously aware of this. There's some strategies that you can think about. You know, revisit your why for your professional commitment. Why did you become a teacher? Why are you doing this? Can give you some more joy perhaps in finding that reason that, yeah, it's hard, but I'm making a difference or whatever. And then the next three kind of go in together: seek out resources, find empathy support for yourself, and look at mentorship. I think all three of those are very important to think about, both within, you know, your resources or your support. Even your mentorship can be within your own schools, or they can be outside people. So I know during COVID, Alicia, Lisa, and Mariana and I would meet at Books a Million with coffee and sit kind of spread out, and definitely were emotional and empathy supports for each other during a very difficult time for everybody. So that, you know, just seeking out those people that will actively listen to you could be very helpful as well, that you're going through some stuff that you need to express as well. And then, and then reassess the situation. So to go back to that, what are you doing? Are you over empathizing so that you're feeling so much emotions that you're going more in that imagined self and becoming distressed yourself? How can you step away from the situation, perhaps, if that's the case? Are you enabling them, and therefore you have to go and figure out what's happening? Is there, again, that goes back to that seeking out resources and mentorship. I'm feeling fatigue. I'm dealing with this situation. I can't deal with it anymore. But there's this other counselor who maybe can take over, or this other teacher that could perhaps, we can tag team it so that it's not so exhausting for either of us. So those are some ways that you can avoid empathy fatigue. But does anybody else have any ideas about what you can do for self-care or to avoid this empathy fatigue? Going on a cruise. That's a nice self-care.
But on a smaller, that is awesome.
Right.
Oh, very nice, Heather. Making sure you're as gentle with yourself as you are with your students.
Right.
Yeah. That's what I was just going to say, Jody. Finding things that bring you joy, whether it's reading a book. Sherri and I both love mystery books, so we trade books back and forth, and it just different, whatever it is. Yeah. Going hiking, walking.
Yeah. I think sometimes also giving yourself time in this journey of becoming, as empathetic as you want to be as a professional, because there will be some situations where you can, automatically kind of get into that state, and it's there are things that you're familiar and you already had some experience, but there will be some situations where maybe you need to give yourself a semester or a year long to really understand, how to help, or how you position yourself in maybe the relationship that you might have with students and in some families or their particular context. So I think time puts such a pressure on practitioners, and kind of be cognizant with that of that might help.
Yeah, and I also like the statements of, give yourself grace, be as gentle with yourself as you are with your students. And I think that's emotionally, but also we had talked about flexible, and I was talking about flexible due dates. Do we have to have everything graded right away? There's sometimes that, I just had to walk into my class and say, sorry, I didn't have your exam graded, but my daughter-in-law just had a baby. I was busy. And students will, a lot of times accept that as, "Oh, okay, that there is a reason, and that I'm not, grading papers 24/7, although so allowing that flexibility for yourself as well, I think goes into that grace. And if you allow them the flexibility, allow yourself as well. Okay, so this is just we're not going to go into all of this since we already did, but this is just the slide that we started off with of the empathetic reflection process of all the different questions you can ask yourself to make sure that you are trying to be using imagined other rather than imagined self, and how you can react in a way that is truly empathetic. And then just to drill it all down to one little pithy statement is the platinum rule. So if you can think about do unto others as they would like done to themselves, can be very helpful. That's that imagined other. A lot of us grew up learning about the golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto you. although that is much more of the imagined self. And so switching it around a little, just slightly, one word change, and it can help you get into their space instead of your own. And then reflecting back, just to think about it, is there anything else? Is there any questions that you would like to ask us about empathy? And if you have any examples of yourself of how you've used empathy and how it worked, or how it didn't work, we're interested in your experiences, and then also opening it up to any questions that you might have.
And I wanted to make one little comment. We created a book list on children's books and youth books that can help with teaching empathy, or also just with empathy in general. And we will make sure Beth will get it sent to you, the list. And we'll also, she'll send you these slides, and on the next slide, there's some of these strategies. Whoop, there we go. All put there. Sorry. I
Yes.
thought about the book list
Yep.
and wanted to make sure we mentioned that.
Yeah, so this slide is a recap. So when you get this, this is a recap of everything that we discussed, all on this one nice little slide. But if anybody has any questions, yeah, please feel free to ask.
Our last slide there shows that we have a survey to collect information so we can understand how if this was helpful to you, and how. And so this is a post survey, and we really appreciate any information you can provide for us, because we don't want you to have to sit through something that you didn't like or wasn't helpful. And so we appreciate that very much.
Yeah, and just I'll give the plug for our research, but not only to give us feedback for how to do these workshops in the future, but also we're collecting research for publication. So on this survey, there will be a very long, detailed permission slip that we would love for you to say that you would be a participant in our research. There's nothing else that you would need to do beyond what you are doing anyways, except for clicking, I agree. Okay, and then the final slide is our, if afterwards, if you find you have a question that you want to ask us or share something with us, these are our email addresses that you can contact us with.
Thank you for spending some time with us.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all.
Thank you all so much.